Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special Yom HaShoah program of Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I'm an educator at the museum. Ours is the first Holocaust museum in the United States founded by Holocaust survivors. Since the 1960s, our institution's mission has been to commemorate, educate, and inspire our community. Following the mandate of our founding survivors, our programs and admission are always free of charge. Today is Yom HaShoah, and this year marks the 75th anniversary of liberation, the end of World War II, and the moment in which survivors had to recreate home. This time every year, we are proud to host educational programs about the Yiddish language, music, and culture, which was so tragically disrupted as a result of the Holocaust. As we will learn, this vibrant language never disappeared. In fact, the earliest plans by the founding survivors for our museum were written in Yiddish. This morning's program focuses on the words of Yiddish resistance in song and poetry from the Holocaust era. I'm honored to introduce Professor Miri Koral, Yiddish scholar and founder of CIYCL, California Institute of Yiddish Culture and Language, and Mike Burstyn, internationally acclaimed Israeli-American actor whose parents were prominent actors in the Yiddish theater. If you have any questions, please type them into the comments, and after the discussion, we'll have a Q&A. After the Q&A, we will conclude with the partisan song, Zognit Kainmol. Thank you for joining us, and let us begin our program.
So, first of all, I want to thank Michael Morgenstern for conceiving of this program, and I want to thank the LA Museum of the Holocaust for producing it. And I also feel so honored to be doing this with Mike Burstyn, whom I've admired as a performer my entire life, and especially for his devotion to Yiddish. And one last thing is I just want to give a shout out to my students in my UCLA Yiddish film class, many of whom do not have Yiddish heritage in their background. And so I appreciate very much their open-mindedness in learning about this particular culture. So we're going to start the program with a song by one of the most famous of all Yiddish songwriters. He was the quintessential folk poet. His name was Mordechai Gebirtig, and he lived in Krakow, Poland, making his living as a carpenter. And yet he was always writing these amazing songs. He had no formal training in music, and yet he was able to compose beautiful music for these songs. He was born in 1877 and was working and writing songs all along. And then in March 1936, there was an incident in the Polish town of Prishtik, and it turned out to be a pogrom, which involved the murder of a number of Jewish families and young children. And as a result of this, the Jewish victims were somehow accused of assaulting their murderers, even though they were standing up for themselves. So this pogrom had sent a shockwave throughout the Jewish community, and Mordechai Gebirtig was greatly affected by this, and he wrote this song called Es brennt, which means it's burning, in response to the event. So this was actually written earlier in 1936, and it's considered to be really prescient because it evokes what was going to happen to the shtetls across Eastern Europe. And Mordechai Gebürtig himself was a victim of the Holocaust, and he was, as he was taken from the Krakow ghetto, he was on his way to the cattle cars. He was shot in June of 1942. The opening of this song, which repeats a number of times in English, I'm going to tell you in English before Mike sings it, is "It's burning, brothers, it's burning. Oh, how our poor town is burning. Angry winds rage, are tearing, smashing, blowing higher still the wild flames. All around now burns." And most important, and you stand there looking on with folded arms, and you stand there looking on. Our town is burning. Es brennt.
I also want to echo Miri's thank you to the museum for doing this, especially the Holocaust Memorial Service dedicated to Yiddish, which is our Mamalushan. And the most important thing is that we are maintaining it as a living language. And I want to thank Miri also for sharing this with me. Es brennt, Briderlach, es brennt. Oi unser Orem Stetel Nebech brennt. Böse Winden mit Jargussen reißen, brechen und zerblosen. Starker noch die wilde Flammen, als darum schon brennt. Und ihr steht und guckt so sich mit verlegter Hand. Und ihr steht und guckt so sich, unser Städtel brennt. Es brennt, Brüderlach, es brennt. Oi unser Orem Städtel Nebach brennt. So haben schon die Feiersungen, das ganze Städtel eingeschlungen. Und die böse Winden huschen, das ganze Städtel brennt. Und ihr steht und guckt so sich mit verlegter Hand. Und ihr steht und guckt so sich, unser Städtel brennt. Es brennt, Briderlach, es brennt. Es kann Cholile kommen der Moment. Unser Stadt mit uns zusammen soll weg in Asch und Flammen. Bleiben soll wie noch a Schlacht, nur puste schwarze Wand. Und ihr steht und guckt so sich mit verlegter Hand. Und ihr steht und guckt so sich, unser Städtel brennt. Es brennt, Briderlach, es brennt. Die Hilfe ist nur in euch allein gewähnt. Oi, du Städtel ist euch teuer, nehmt die Kehlem, löscht das Feuer, löscht mit euer Regenblut, beweist, dass ihr das kennt. Steht nicht, Brüder, oder so sich, mit verlegter Hand. Steht nicht, Brüder, löscht das Feuer, unser Städtel brennt.
That song always gives me the chills. The next piece that we've chosen is a poem, and it's by Avram Sutzkevel, who is probably the most notable finest and unfortunately unsung Jewish poet of the last century. His name should be a household name like Shalom Aleichem for anyone interested in Jewish and in particular Yiddish poetry. And since this is not yet the case, many of us are doing our best to make it so. He was born in 1913 near the city of Vilna, and he is identified by self-definition and lovingly so by others as the Vilna poet. He was an established poet before World War II, having published several well-received collections of ecstatic poems extolling the natural world. And his poetry was remarkable for the twining of sound and pure image. He was also a member of the short-lived but enormously influential literary group, Jung Vilna. In the Vilna Ghetto during the war, he was a heroic member of the Papier Brigade, the paper brigade, rescuing with grave danger to himself cherished Jewish works from under the noses of the rapacious Nazis. He and his wife, who had suffered the murder of their infant son in the ghetto, also escaped to the woods, and they joined the partisans fighting the Nazis. The entire time that Avram Sutzkever was in the ghetto and in the woods, often hiding in unbearable conditions, continued to write Yiddish poetry, convinced that this is what was keeping him alive. His value and renown were such that he and his wife were airlifted out of the woods by the Soviets and taken to Moscow. After the war, he testified at the Nuremberg trials about the Nazi atrocities in Vilna. And for most of his life, in poetry and in prose, he focused on capturing the essence of his beloved city of Vilna, in shining memory, as well as the horrors of the Jewish inhabitants that they endured. As he put it in one of his poems, after the bonfire, what was left were his words, glimmering like scorched pearls. This poem by Sutzkever that Mike is going to read was written in the Vilna Ghetto in February 1943.
I'll read the translation first. And this is how you should speak to the orphan, by Avram Sutzkever, translated by Miri Koral. And this is how you should speak to the orphan when he lifts up his frail fists and asks, "Who am I?" Your father, believing, lifted his head. A dark current inundated him with boiling ash and molten brimstone and swept him up and his wife, his children, school, and cemetery, and swept up all the ancestors and those who were hidden in the womb of the future. Because he who succumbs murders the generations that ferment in him, waiting for redemption. Only you remain. So you are the air, a kernel of holiness in windy fingers, crumbled on rock-raised fields, a tiny piece that is a diminished whole. And if he asks, "Is my name?" The orphan, your name is Folk, because that was the name of your bearded grandfather, endlessly wandering the back roads, and because in your essence worlds collide, and those folk who strike you are themselves stricken and fall blinded on their own swords. Then weave into the nocturnal alien places your spring, clear as a brook, facing the light of dawn, because you are a blood-spattered miracle and timeless, a tiny piece that is a diminished whole. And if he asks, for whom? Then answer, for those who sprout from your heart and will the spirit of millions transform into a warm home for all for those who themselves will mold destiny to their own form, and you, whose name is folk, and your face, a demolished nest, without birds, without inhabitants, clamber up the steps of the night to greet the dawn and scream at it, cleanse me anew, son, and forgive. All that occurred is an error of fortune. I'll prepare real days instead of graves. I'll build my own cities with my own arms. And there eternity will come to dwell, and days will blaze in gilded crowns. Und azoi sollst du reden zum Jusem von Avrum Zutzkever. Und azoi sollst du reden zum Jusem, wenn jener wird heben verchallischte Fäusten und fragen, wer bin ich? Dein Tate hat gelebt, ich verheut dein Kopf. Über ihm ist rüber a finster gefleckt, mit kochigen Asch und zerschmolzenem Schwebel, und mitgeschleppt ihm, sein Weib, seine Kinder, Schul und Beisäulem, und mitgeschleppt euch die vergangene Deures, und die, was behalten in Tracht von der Zukunft, weil der, was kommt der harge die Deures, was jäuren in ihm, und warten auf euch Leis. Nur du bist geblieben. Bist du der Jarschen, a Sammendl Kedusche in wintische Finger, verbreckelt auf steinende choreve Felder, a Teilechel, was ist a verkleinerte Ganzkeit. Und Oiber wird fragen, und wie ist mein Numen? Entfer dem Jusem, dein Numen ist Volk. Weil azoi hat geheißen, dein berdiger Seide in ewigen Vogel auf hintische Wegen. Und weil in dein Tropen rangeln sich Welten und Völker dich schlugendig werden geschlagen und fallen geblente auf eigene Schwerden, ist werd in die nachtige Fremden dein Frühling, rein wie a Qual, gegen Licht von Beginnen, weil du bist a blutiger Ness und allzeitig, a Teilechel, was ist a verkleinerte Ganzkeit. Und Oiber wird fragen, für wemen ist Entfer, für jene, was wurzeln arois von dein Herzen und wellen dem Geist von Millionen verwandeln in a warme Heim für alle Jesäumen. Für die, was allein wellen knetten dem Geurl noch eigenem Chulem, noch eigenem Furem. Und du, was dein Nomen ist Volk und dein Punem a chureven Nest und Fegel und Tenner, kletter arauf auf die Treppe von der Nacht, begegen dem Aufgang, in Schrei ihm entgegen, reinig mich, Sohn, auf das Nei und sei Meuchel. Als was gewehen, ist dem Geurls Atues. Ich will zugreiten emesse Tag anstatt Quorum. Ich will ausbauen eigene Städt mit mein Ohren. Und dort wird kommen die Ewigkeit wohnen und Tagwellen leichten in gildene Kräunen. Wow.
Yeah, that's a wow. That's a real wow. Yeah, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous poem. What's amazing is the quality of these poems written in the most awful circumstances. And I just want to point out that, you know, when we think of the Holocaust, we think about the annihilation, the murder, the horror. and sometimes we also focus on the resistance, mostly the armed resistance. But this, what we're addressing today, was the spiritual resistance that was also taking place in the ghettos, even in the camps, where people were still being extraordinarily creative, and in their mother tongue, Mamaloshen. We're fortunate that some of this survived, both with the survivors and even from those that didn't survive. We have extraordinary poetry from them. So what we're hearing today is a teeny tiny sampling of that really astonishing output during this time. Wouldn't you say, Mike? Right?
Yes, and not to minimize it, the importance of the language that they were using, the Mamelushen, the Yiddish, and the amazing high quality of this poem that I just read. I mean, many people know Yiddish words or speak Yiddish at home, but this kind of Yiddish is so rare. And these poets and these authors and these heroes were so eloquent in their Yiddish language. Some of these words, frankly, that I just read, I had never heard before. But we must remember them. And this is the perfect way to do it. This is something that I really am so proud of doing, to be able to hear their words and not just read them on the page, to hear what it sounded like. And little by little, unfortunately, we are losing the native Yiddish speakers. And I think it's yours and mine and our generation and the next generation to make sure we don't lose that link in the golden decade, in that golden chain, and make sure that Yiddish remains as a living language.
Yes, I agree. So the next poem that we're going to be reading, that I'm going to be reading for you, is because it's a woman's voice. This was from Chava Rosenfarb. So she's actually known as a major novelist, a major Yiddish novelist of the 20th century, with many of her books reflecting on Jewish life in Poland's second largest city of Lodz. So Jewish life before and during the war. She was born there in Lodz in 1923. And she was also a poet her entire life and published a number of volumes of poetry, including English translations of her own Yiddish poetry, which I'm going to read. She was a survivor not only of the Lodz Ghetto, but also of Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen, among other camps. And somehow she survived that, including an almost lethal bout of typhus at the end of the war. And she emigrated with her husband to Canada, where she lived until her death, at first in Montreal and then in Lethbridge, Alberta. Her literary works won numerous international prizes, including Israel's coveted Itzik Mangel Prize and the Canadian Jewish Book Award. Today's selection was published in English in a collection called Exile at Last, and it's titled Last Days in the Ghetto. But it was actually composed of two Yiddish poems that Chava Rosenfarb wrote in the Lodz Ghetto in 1942. So I'm going to read it first. This is her translation in English. Last Days in the Ghetto. Summer night, we stood at the window, you and I. Through the pain of your eyes, I looked. In the pain of your eyes, I saw shadowy drapes about to be drawn over the sky. The earth climbed upon the blue and black clouds covering the quivering sun. Through the pain of your eyes, I looked. In the pain of your eyes, I saw the night climbing out from a chimney pit, putting out the flickering lights in your pupils with bare fists of smoke. Summer night. We stood at the window, you and I, when the darkness had slaughtered the day and we remained all alone. I suddenly saw a glowing redness rise in your eyes. You smiled and said that the sun had left you an heirloom before it went out. Bats fly past the window, wings flutter, dancing specters. The sun is gone in the western sky, the remains of its disarrayed bed still warm from its body. On purple sheets and torn pillows lies the day and remembers. Soon, it too will be gone. Specters of anguish celebrate the hour. You stand by the window and ask, who will remember the sun when we are gone? The last day vanishes, nameless and alone. Only the spiders remain. Who will remember father's last sigh, mother's last cry when we are gone? Who will forever see fear in my sister's braid, torn by the wind as she runs when we are gone? Who will caress the name of his wife and forever call the name of his child? And who will know the name of this man, the last of his kin, the last of his tribe, if this time tomorrow he too will be gone? So in Yiddish, in Sommer offendiger Schau, beim Fenster sind mir gestanden, ich und du. In Scheub von deiner Augen hab ich geguckt, sot wär dem Himmel oben, mit schottendicke Vorhangen verruckt. Bin ich gestanden und gesehen, wie auf den Himmelbläu heraufgekrochen ist die Erd und hat mit Grudem, mit Schwarze verschitt die zapplendicke Sonne. In Scheu von deinen Augen hab ich geguckt und Glas von deinen Augen hab ich erblickt, wie von a Kräumenloch herausgekrochen ist die Nacht und hat das Licht in deine Augen mit Lodens, mit Schwarze vermacht. In Sommer offendiger Schau, beim Fenster sind mir gestanden, ich und du. Und wenn der Choschech hat geschochten, scheun dem Tag, und mir sind geblieben da allein, hab ich in deine Augen plötzlich der Sehn, a glieke Reutkeit zerscheint. Hast du geschmeichelt und gesagt, als hat die Sonne ei Rusche zu lassen beim Vergehen. And the second one is mir kommen Fledermais fliehen vorbei Fenster, Fliegeln flattern aus dem Tanz von Gespenster. Die Sonne ist schon gegangen. Auf meinem Himmel liegt zerschlabbert ihr Bett, noch heiß von ihr Leib. Auf Purpurkischens und zerflickte Zichen liegt noch der Tag und der Mond bald, wer euchet gehen. Stehst du in Schau von immer Gespenster entgegen dein Fenster und brummen dein Gebrumm. Wer wird ermahnen die Sonne? Wir kommen Wir kommen Namenlos vergeht der Tag, der letzter, es wird bleiben, a Spinn. Wer wird gedenken dem Tatens letzten Krechts? Wer wird gedenken der Mammens letzten Weh? Wir kommen Wir kommen Wer wird ewig sehen dem Pachet von der Schwester Zepp, was Wind zerschließen hat beim letzten Gehen? Wir kommen Wir kommen Und wer wird zärteln dem Namen von dem Weib? Und wer wird ewig rufen, das verlorene Kind? Wir kommen Wir kommen Und wer wird wissen einmal, wie es heißt, Ot der, was es steht da beim Fenster erzählt? Wir kommen Wir kommen Als allein, der Letzte von der größten Stadt, als allein, der letzte Singer, Bunem Balpein, kommt kommt Und morgen wird euch schon mehr nicht sein.
That was so beautiful, Miri.
So we come back to Sutzkever, who made his life in Israel after the war. He arrived there in 1947, and he lived there till his death in 2010. Mike, you probably met him, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I did indeed. And what's interesting is what we were, apropos, what we were talking about earlier about Yiddish not disappearing as a living language. This poem actually speaks directly to that. Sutzkever was pretty prophetic in this poem, because that's exactly what our motivation and our purpose is here today. I'll read the English first, and the poem is called Yiddish. Shall I start from the beginning? Shall I, like Abraham, defying brotherhood, smash all the idols? Shall I let myself be translated while alive? Shall I plant my tongue and wait till it transforms into our forefathers' raisins and almonds? What kind of absurd jokes preaches my fellow poet with his whiskers, that soon my mother tongue will set forever? 100 years from now, we may still be sitting here at the Jordan carrying on this argument. For a question gnaws and paws at me. If he knows exactly where Levi Yitzchak's prayer, Yoash's poem, and Kulbak's are wandering to their demise, could he please show me where the language will succumb? Maybe at the Wailing Wall? If so, I shall come there, come, open my mouth, and like a lion garbed in fiery crimson, I shall swallow the language as it sets, swallow it, and awaken all the generations with my roar. Und jetzt auf Yiddish. Yiddish von Avrum Sutzkever. Soll ich anheuben von Anheub? Soll ich wie Avrum aus Bruderschaft zerhacken alle Getzen? Soll ich sich lebendig lassen übersetzen? Soll ich einpflanzen mein Zung und warten, bis verwandeln wird sie sich in uwesdicke Rojinkes mit Mandeln? Was für a katovestige Witzen darschend mein Poesiebruder mit die Backenborden, als mein Mameluschen geht bald unter? Mir will noch in 100 Jahren herum, do kennt ich sitzen und führen die Diskussie bei dem Jarden. Weil a Scheile nuckt und nuggelt. Ob weiß genau, wo die Twille von Berditschewer, Joasches Lied und Kolbachs wogelt zu dem Untergang, da soll mir a Steiger anweisen, wohin die Sprach geht unter. Efter bei dem Kreuzl Maruvi? Oiba soi, will ich dort kommen, öffnen das Mäul und wie a Leib ungeton in feierdicke Zunter, einschlingen dem Luschen, wo's geht unter. Einschlingen und alle Deures wecken mit mein Brummen.
That was wonderful, Mike.
a bit of humor as well. Yiddish
Yes.
was also the language that kept us going, even in the darkest times. Even in the times of the Holocaust, there was always that Yiddish humor, a bissel gelächter, that kept people from going mad. You know, that's the amazing thing about our folk, our people, that we are able to laugh and cry at the same time. That's what's kept us going.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. that fine line between laughing and crying often. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. What I just want to mention about Suskever is, you know, he was facing a tremendous push in Israel for Hebrew to be the language, you know, to forge a national identity. And so Yiddish was falling by the wayside. He saw that right away, because this poem that Mike read was written in 1948. So, you know, right away he was aware that this was happening, but he persisted. He published from 1949 an amazing journal called Die Goldene Kite, as Mike mentioned, the Golden Chain. It was the preeminent Yiddish literary journal until 1995, a quarterly journal. He had other editors, but he was always at the helm of this extraordinary output, this, drawing from people's writings from all over the world. And yeah, he was an amazing man, always keeping Yiddish alive in his manner, and Vilna, right, in his because only 5% of the Jews of Vilna survived the war. 5%.
Yerushalayim Belita.
Yeah.
The Jerusalem of Lithuania was Vilna. And Miri, we actually experienced that ourselves, my family and I, when we came to Israel in the early 1950s. There was even a organization to support the Hebrew language, to save and protect the Hebrew language. It was called Haliga lehaganat hasafa haivrit, the League to protect the Hebrew language. And when we performed in Yiddish in those days, it was very difficult, and especially because the leaders of the country at the time were Yiddish speakers at home. They all came from Yiddish-speaking homes. They spoke Yiddish even among themselves. But the effort was at that time that anything that had to do with the Holocaust or the diaspora, that Israel was establishing itself as a modern Jewish state, and Hebrew was the new national language. And so Yiddish poetry, Yiddish literature, which was much richer at the time than the Hebrew literature that was just coming of age, was considered a danger. And so everything was possibly done to promote Hebrew as the national language and not to speak Yiddish as much as possible. When we performed in those days, there was even an extra tax that was levied on performances in Israel in foreign languages. And Yiddish was at the time considered a foreign language, and we had to pay an extra, the public had to pay an extra tax to see a Yiddish play. But that changed in 1965, thank God. It changed when we performed the Megillah of Itzik Manger, another great enfant terrible of the Yiddish poetry. Yes. And that showed the public in Israel that what we say in Hebrew, Hashed hu lo nora, the danger is not there. And Yiddish today is one of the official languages of the state of Israel.
Yes. Yeah, it's still struggling, but it's struggling everywhere. But we'll keep it going.
Unfortunately, the daily newspaper is not there anymore. The Letztenayis of Mordechai Tsanin, who established there were several daily newspapers. Unfortunately, that is no longer available, but we're still here.
Right. There's still Yiddish theater, which is, man leckt sich die Finger jetzt von jiddischen Theater, ja?
As the song that we will sing in a little while says, "Wir seien du."
Yes.
Yeah, we are here. We are still here.
Yeah. Amen. So I think before we close with the partisan song, and before that I'll tell you a little bit about Hirsch Glick, who wrote it. But I think we're up for Q&A, right? This is the moment for that. So
Michael, are you with us?
Okay, so we do have a few questions. Okay, thank you so much for those beautiful renditions of those really phenomenal pieces. Again, these really exemplify Yiddish culture and Yiddish resistance. We do have a few questions. First, a question for both of you. Can you please explain briefly your backgrounds, how you learned Yiddish? I know you're both native speakers, but how you learned it and how you came to use it for your whole lives, please.
Mike?
Ladies first. I'm old-fashioned.
Okay, then. Well, Yiddish is my native language. My parents were both from Poland. They managed to survive miraculously by way of Russia, but also those horrible Soviet labor camps in the Gulag. They still managed to survive. They made their way to Israel, where I was born. And then not that much later, we were in New York. But all my life, I spoke Yiddish with my parents. That was the only language at home. Unlike my peers, where Yiddish was perhaps spoken by the parents, but the children responded in English. So they really lost their language that way. That just didn't work in my family. We spoke Yiddish all the time. I didn't grow up with formal training in Yiddish. I mean, I did learn to read and write it. But later, I took a course at Columbia when I was a graduate student in environmental planning, just for fun. And I learned that Yiddish had a grammar, and a complicated grammar. And so my respect for the language grew tremendously at that point. And then I put it aside, really, except for speaking with my parents, I didn't speak it much. I wasn't interested in it. I grew up with going to Yiddish theater. Second Avenue Yiddish theater was still going on when I was a child in New York. So it wasn't until my parents died that I realized I was losing my language, and I wanted to reclaim it. And I just went to a gathering at the Yiddish Book Center, and I fell in love with Yiddish. I fell in love with the literature. I fell in love with the music, the films. I mean, I just fell in love with it, and I simply followed my love as I was still working in environmental planning. And one thing led to another, and I wound up teaching and then creating this Yiddish Institute, etc. So that's my story. So Yiddish is still very much with me, although my parents never lived to see me doing these things.
They're watching.
Yes, on some on some level, they must know, right?
Yeah.
All of the ancestors.
Before I explain my background, I want to give a shout out here. Speaking of Yiddish literature, Yiddish books, Yiddish films, there were so many beautiful Yiddish movies that have been digitized and are available. The book center in Amherst, Aaron Lansky's center, for those who are interested, there is a treasure trove of Yiddish books that were rescued thanks to Aaron many years ago. Digital available testimonies of people that come from the Yiddish background, Yiddish movies, Yiddish recordings. So I would urge anyone to go and check that out. As far as I'm concerned, growing up, I was born in New York, and there was always the story that my father told about the little Yiddish bobble that only spoke Yiddish. And if you didn't speak Yiddish to your grandparents in those days, they wouldn't answer. And so she was walking along 2nd Avenue, and she was in her late 80s or 90s, and she walked up to a man on the street, and she asked him, "Mister, ihr redt Yiddish?" And he looked at her and he said, "No, ma'am, I don't speak Yiddish." She walked up to another man who was selling oranges and apples, and, "Mister, der redst Yiddish?" And he said, "No, che cosa, mamma mia, io italiano non speak Yiddish." So she walked up to a third man, and he said, "Bobbe, ich red Yiddish. Was willst du?" And then she asked him, "What time is it now?" It shows you that Yiddish can be used in many different ways. Well, I was born in New York. My twin sister and I were born to two of the greatest stars of the Yiddish theater. My father was Pesach Burstyn. My mother was Lilian Lux, and they married and performed together and lived together for almost 48 years. We were born, literally in a trunk, I guess you could say. And I started hearing Yiddish as a baby. And all my father's friends and colleagues at the time were great Yiddish stars. I knew them all. People like Molly Picon and Menashe Skolnick and Moshe Oisher and the great Maury Schwartz, who I worked with as a child. And so at the age of 7, my parents would travel around the world and perform Yiddish to the different communities in the world, survivors who still wanted to hear Yiddish musicals, Yiddish theater. And Yiddish theater, when the immigrants came from Europe at the turn of the previous century, the 19th century, their language was Yiddish, and the only help they had from their drudgery working in the sweatshops was going to the Yiddish theater. And so when I was 7, we arrived in Argentina, and my parents were performing, and we had to go to school. So at the time, there were 2 Yiddish schools, the Yud Lamed Peretz and the Shulam Aleichem Shulas. This was 1952, and the Jewish schools at the time worldwide were really not teaching Hebrew that much, but Yiddish. And so I was enrolled in the Yud Lamed Peretz Shule school. Half of the day was Spanish, and the other half was Yiddish. And so from the age of 7, I learned to read and write and speak Yiddish. I began performing with my parents. And since then, it's been a long time that I performed in Yiddish with my parents. Eventually went off in Israel on my own into the Hebrew entertainment world. But I still go back every once in a while, as often as I can. I go back to the Yiddish stage to make sure that people can still enjoy this incredible language, our Mamelushin, our mother's tongue.
Yes.
Now, by the way, there is a documentary that came out several years ago. If you're interested, it tells the story of my family, myself, my sister, and the history and the future and the present of the Yiddish theater. It's called The Komödiant. It's on DVD, I guess.
You are a treasure, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you.
120.
Amen. En dennoch wollen wir beten weiter.
Ja. Yeah.
One question we have is, and I know you've both touched on this already, but what do you say to people who have essentially dismissed Yiddish over the years as a thing of the past, you know, a language of the diaspora? That's, I think, something we've all heard a lot in those words. You know, we have Hebrew now to be, you know, to be the language to represent the Jewish people in Israel. But why do you think that Yiddish is still relevant to Jewish culture?
Well, let me just say that one doesn't necessarily cancel out the other. They are two different languages. And we have to remember that a great percentage of the Jewish folk, our people that was lost in the Holocaust, their native language was Yiddish. 1.5 million Jewish children that perished in the Holocaust, a great percentage of them didn't speak Polish at home or Russian at home. They spoke Yiddish at home. And if we forget the language, we're forgetting the heritage. We're kind of negating them to the ash heap of history. It's as if they didn't exist. Yiddish is part and parcel of our culture, of our heritage. And if we lose that, we've lost our past. And if we forget our roots, then we're lost. There's no reason today to relegate Yiddish to history. The fact that Hebrew is the national language of the Jewish state, that's wonderful. But there is also Ladino. Would you say that the Sephardic Jews should forget their Ladino language, where they came from, where their roots are? That's the way I feel.
Yeah. I just want to add one small thing to that. Even though we are focusing today on a very sad subject, one of the reasons why I was drawn to Yiddish is that my observation in myself and in others who were sharing in the experience of learning Yiddish or learning songs in Yiddish, or even, anything to do with Yiddish culture, that it brought tremendous joy. I don't know why, it's in our kishkes somehow in a good way. It just brings joy, and even to young people who don't have much of a memory of this at all, even from their grandparents, it still awakens something in them that is joyous. And certainly those that have had connection with Yiddish in their family backgrounds, it's tremendously satisfying to them to engage with it more.
Let me make one other observation, Michael, and that is that the fact that Yiddish is the daily language of the ultra-Orthodox, the Hasidic community. Yiddish is used by the ultra-Orthodox community and the Orthodox community, especially in Jerusalem, or if you go to Brooklyn or Mea Shearim or Bnei Brak. Yiddish is spoken. You know, if you go at night, I love to go to the Western Wall in Israel, especially at night. You see little children, 3 or 4 years old. They're running around and they're Moshelach and Shleimelach and they're speaking Yiddish with each other. My only regret is they are using the Yiddish language so as not to profane the holy language, which is used in prayer. And as a result, they are lost to what we have been reading today and singing today. They are lost to the Yiddish literature, the rich Yiddish culture, the poetry, the songs, but they are carrying on the Yiddish language. It's just a shame that they cannot carry on the Yiddish literature and the Yiddish, rich Yiddish culture that we have been reading and singing today.
Right, right. Yeah, we want to keep the keys to this language available to everyone to be able to unlock this extraordinary treasury of cultural output, of especially the literature and the songs. It's a world-class literature, and you know, we need to have access to it not only through translation.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I appreciate those answers. And as somebody who works with Holocaust history and who had 4 grandparents who spoke Yiddish, it's important to me, and I know to our institution, that we do not forget this language because it is such an important part of our culture. I would like to just share, we have several other comments on our Facebook page with people just so happy and moved to hear this beautiful Yiddish that you've read and sang today. And people are have been just so moved to hear this Dimamalusha, this wonderful language. And I know we have at least 3 survivors in our community who are watching: Jerry Weiser, Henry Slucky, and David Langa, who just sang the Partisan song at our Yom HaShoah program. I know we have more survivors and more 2Gs and 3Gs watching. Sorry that I missed the rest of you, but I see you and we appreciate you so much. I think what we'll do now, we will do the Partisan song, and then we will conclude the program. So we can start with that.
So a few words about the composer and this song. So this is probably the most famous poem song that came out of the Holocaust. And not many people are aware that it was written by a very young man. His name was Hirsch Glick. He came from a very humble background in, again, Vilna. His family was pretty impoverished, and as a result, he wasn't able to even complete his high school education because he had to work to help support his family. Nevertheless, he joined the literary group that I mentioned earlier with respect to Avram Sutzkever, Jung Vilna. He was part of that, so he was writing poetry before the war. And he even edited 4 issues of a journal called Jungwald, Young Woods. So when the war broke out, he wound up in a forced labor camp outside of Vilna, and then was returned to the Vilna Ghetto. He was part of the failed, I should say, the uprising that never happened in the Vilna Ghetto, but he was part of that partisan spirit. And he managed to escape into the woods. And when word came of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, he was inspired to write this particular song, which is called in English, the partisan hymn, in Yiddish, Sag nit keinmal, never say. The music was from a popular Russian song of its day. And this song, this hymn, quickly spread throughout the land among the partisans, even in the other ghettos and even in the camps. This was an important sign of resistance, of continuity. He was 22 when he wrote this song, maybe even 21, actually probably 21 in 1943. Unfortunately, he was captured. He was sent to a horrible camp in Estonia. And we don't know exactly what happened to him at that point. He might have escaped from that camp and then been captured and killed by the Nazis, possibly by the Soviets. We don't know exactly, but we understand that his life ended in 1944 at the age of 22. So he wrote other poems of his have survived, other songs, but this one is the most famous. Sag nit keinmal, never say. You are going on your last road, your last way. And Mike will sing it a cappella.
And if anyone wants to join, please do. Sag nit keinmal, as du gehst dem letzten Weg. Gotts himlen bleiene, verstellen bleue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird ab heut und unser Trott mir seinen do. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird ab heut und unser Trott mir seinen do. Von grünem Palmenland bis weißen Land von Schnee. Wir kommen an mit unser Pein, mit unser Weh. Und wo gefallen ist a Spritz von unser Blut, sprotzen wird dort unser Gwure, unser Mut. Und wo gefallen ist a Spritz von unser Blut, sprotzen wird dort unser Gwure, unser Mut. Es wird die Morgensonn begilden uns dem Heim, und der Nächten wird verschwinden mit dem Feind. Nur oi versamen wird die Sonne dem Kajo, wie a Parol soll gehen das Lied von dort zu dort. Nur oi versamen wird die Sonne dem Kajo, wie a Parol soll gehen das Lied von dort zu dort. Das Lied geschrieben ist mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Liedl von a Vogel auf der Frei. Das hat der Volk zwischen fallen dick gewend. Das Lied gesungen mit Naganes in die Hand. Das hat der Volk zwischen fallen dick gewend. Das Lied gesungen mit Naganes in die Hand. Da sag nit keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg. Gotts himlen bleiene, verstellen bleue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird ab heut und unser Trott mir seinen do. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird ab heut und unser Trott mir seinen do.
Dank to both of you for participating in this program, and this was so meaningful. We're so happy that you were able to do this. And just as a reminder to everyone in our community before we sign off, while the museum is closed, we will regularly be providing these sorts of programs. We have a program this Thursday, April 23rd at 10 o'clock Pacific time, 75 years after the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, a conversation with Lord Daniel Finkelstein and survivor Ava Bretler. Ava was liberated in Bergen-Belsen, and Lord Finkelstein is a journalist and politician who sits in the House of Lords. For more information on our programs, please follow our Facebook page and our website, www.lamoth.org. Again, Ashainem Dank, thank you both so much, and we will remember Yiddish and the Holocaust today.
And if you want to, I just want to say, if you want to know more about CIYCL, go to our website, yiddishinstitute.org, under tributes, a lot of wonderful information about CIYCL. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Miri. Thank you, Michael. Thank you,
Michael.
Museum. In ihr wünschach, ihr soll sein stark und gesund. Please remain safe, strong, and healthy.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Seid gesund.
Seid
gesund.